Hey, everybody, this is Eric Mishi, SAVE Executive Director, Suicide Awareness Voices of Education. It has been a great week of conversations and discussions about things related to mental health, things related to suicide prevention, suicide awareness, with folks from all over the country who are doing amazing work on so many different fronts. Conversations about how can we help folks who are veterans and dealing with veteran suicide. What can we do to help promote 988 across the country, as well as in tribal nations and elsewhere. Really great content, folks who have been so kind and willing to share their thoughts and their information about all the work that we can be doing together to make an impact and help save people's lives. And so one of the things that SAVE has gotten very involved with over the past year is this conversation about how do we keep kids safe online while they're on social media platforms. What can we do to all make an impact to keep this safe? And so we're going to have a little bit of that conversation today. And I'm thrilled to have with us Allison Ivie, who is with the Eating Disorders Coalition for Research, Policy, and Action, who's a government relations representative with the group. Allison, good to see you.
Yes, good to see you too, Eric. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for having the time to share with us. So let's start with kind of share with people a little bit about who you are. What's your background? What do you do?
Yeah, great. So I'm based in Washington, D.C., so the hub of all the federal legislation and policy making. And what we do on behalf of the EDC is really working to make eating disorders a public health priority in the U.S. Really raising up awareness, education, prevention, access to treatment, and really educating lawmakers at the federal level on some of the barriers to care, some of the misconceptions around who is impacted by an eating disorder. And how did I get into this work? I really was intrigued by some of the direct social service work that I did back in college and realizing gaps that I couldn't necessarily fill that I felt were policy gaps. And so I went to grad school, got my master's in public policy, and then really wanted to go to DC and really get an understanding of how federal policy is really made. So I was lucky enough to be a congressional fellow about 10 years ago on the Hill. I worked for a House member in the California delegation and really got to just get firsthand experience of the dysfunction, the craziness that is Capitol Hill. But it gave me a really good understanding of how policy is made and where relationships really drive change. And that, I think the most impactful thing that I learned on the Hill was I loved meeting with constituent groups. Those were the people that highlighted to me issues that were going on in our congressional district. They were the eyes and ears. I was in DC. I didn't know what was going on in, California X district, right? Is they would educate me. And so I think that was a key takeaway of like the power of the constituent voice, the power of advocacy. And so my work with the Eating Disorders Coalition, it's just, I got an opportunity to do work with them and I jumped at the chance. I think everyone has probably been touched by eating disorders in some way. And so that was my experience in college as a collegiate athlete and seeing a lot of the struggles of my teammates, but also how things are normalized. If everyone's doing it, it can't be bad, right? And so really kind of bringing that personal experience into the work I do today, I think has all made an impact and kept me going. And so that's a little bit about how I got to where I am now.
I'm shocked that you would say that you were surprised about how things are so difficult to get anything done in Washington, D.C. That was never my experience. Everything was always very easy. So before we kind of go a little further on social media side, let's talk a little bit more about eating disorders and its correlation clearly to mental health, mental illness, suicidal ideation, and suicide. So talk a little bit specifically as in that space that you occupy, what are the things that you want folks to know as it pertains to eating disorders and how we view them, and how eating disorders are obviously have implications and ramifications that are lifelong and can be obviously incredibly serious.
Yeah. I think, I'm so grateful for partnerships like this because everything kind of hangs together, right? So if you think about eating disorders, I don't think people understand how deadly these illnesses are. So we're looking at the second highest mortality rate of any psychiatric illness that's outside of substance use disorder. We also know that suicide is the leading cause of death for someone with an eating disorder. It is extreme mental anguish. It is incredible pain. And so, the work that SAVE does and kind of uplifting these partnerships, I think are really important because we need to lift all boats. If you have an eating disorder, you're around 18 times more likely to die by suicide. I mean, these are staggering statistics that I don't think people can fully appreciate. And I think the barriers to treatment, because we don't fully understand them, it is not unsurprising when I hear people like, I don't understand, just eat. I mean, it goes so far beyond that. And so, I think just the basics of education of eating disorders 101, when I go into a congressional office, I mean, we're starting at the basics. And so I think it's also important to recognize that people in all body shapes and sizes can have an eating disorder. Someone may look completely perfectly healthy and normal. That doesn't mean they're not struggling. And so I think that's just like a constant theme when we know about mental illness, right? Is that people can look perfectly fine on the outside and be really struggling. And so to kind of hold space for and have empathy for people. And Eric, I know like we've seen this in the work that we've done around our social media bill, right? Is like holding space for the discomfort and for people that are grieving or in pain and allowing them to have a platform to speak and share that story if they're ready to share that story, I think is really important. So yeah, those are just some of like the key stats that I actually just read, I think yesterday through one of our partners, because it's, National Suicide Prevention Month, that really just struck me, that I'm like, God, there's a lot more work to do.
There is a lot of work to do. And one of the things I think it's important to also underscore, because this does tie into this conversation about social media and things like body image, particularly as it impacts girls. But eating disorders is not, I think a lot of times people associate eating disorder with it's primarily women, primarily girls. And certainly those numbers are significantly high, but it also impacts boys and men and young men.
Yes. I think we're seeing the impacts and I think more awareness around young men and boys because of social media too. And it takes kind of a different form. You see it in like the gym influencer videos on TikTok, right? You see kind of the perfect masculine, what it means to have a masculine, strong body, right? For women, it's this odd, thin ideal. For men, it's just muscular. That could take the form of orthorexia, right? Someone who may on the outside just looks like, oh, they just like are super healthy and into clean eating. Well, that could be also masking, someone who's exercising excessively, who's actually using their vegan diet or their vegetarian or healthy diet to mask, an illness. And then, when you get if you're posting videos online and you're getting all this great attention, it really affirms, and entrenches, I think, the behaviors even further. And so it's a really insidious cycle that we've created with social media. That's kind of I feel like the ugly underbelly of it.
Yeah, and which will kind of lead us then into this whole discussion and conversation about social media. You know, we'll kind of get into a little bit of the weeds about the Kids Online Safety Act and things like that, but we've clearly seen that social media, you know, one of the things that I always find frustrating and at the same time doesn't shock me, you know, we tend to couch the negative of social media by trying to start with, well, social media does a lot of really good things, right? Okay, you know, that's great. You can start with that, and that's fine. But there's an awful lot of bad things that it does too, particularly as it relates to young kids. And, you know, it's one thing for adults to have difficult and challenging experiences on social media. It's another thing for kids to have these kind of challenging experiences on social media. And so you've been involved in this fight to pass a national kid protection bill, Kids Online Safety Act. So maybe kind of share with people what that legislation is broadly, what it's intended to do, and how long you've been working on this.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Kids Online Safety Act writ large is supposed to and has the potential to, passed into law, create some just basic safeguards and accountability for big tech companies to protect the users that use their platforms. And we've narrowed it even further because we know everyone deserves those protections online. Politically, we're just not there yet for a variety of reasons. We don't have 30 minutes to discuss, Eric, but at the core, children, right? I mean, we can start there and we can put together some just basic safeguards and some basic accountability to protect the nation's children. And we just haven't done that yet. And I think we're now seeing the ramifications of it and just these horrific stories we have heard of so many families across the nation losing their children to really preventable harms that are online. I mean, and it's really the design of these products is faulty, and families have really borne the consequences of that, and the companies haven't. And we need to change that equation.
So what do you say to the opponents of these kind of efforts? And there's obviously opponents, and most of them funded by the big tech companies that created them. So what do you say to those folks that say, you know, this is nothing more than an insidious effort to try to censor free speech, to control free speech, that, you know, ultimately it's the parents' responsibility to police this. They should be protecting their kids. It's not our responsibility as a company that created these products to be responsible for taking care of these kids and their activities.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, you know, any of this is black and white, right? I mean, there are nuances to everything. And so I think first is that this is not a censorship bill. This is not about content in and of itself. It is about how the algorithms are designed and how some of these design features, something just as simple as autoplay of videos, auto scroll on someone's newsfeed, the For You page, right? That the algorithm pushes content that maybe that user would never search for. I don't know how many families I have met where their children have died because of the For You page. This was not something, we're not, you know, saying a kid can't look up whatever they want online, good, bad, or otherwise. This is about what is being pushed to them. What is out of their hands to actually control. And, you know, we know industry and these companies could change those design practices of their products. There is nothing barring them today from removing auto scroll or autoplay or taking down a For You page. They're not doing it though. And so, I mean, I think that has been a clear indication for me that I'm just like, they're not interested in changing. And right now we've developed a system where there is no accountability or repercussions for any of the lives that have been lost because of a faulty product. And that's kind of, they're like an industry that doesn't have any consequence. I mean, Eric, I'm sure you've heard with Senator Blumenthal, who's, the lead sponsor of this bill, talks about, seatbelts, right? In cars. This was something that the federal government decided, we need to regulate the auto industry and have basic safeguards in a motor vehicle.
Yeah.
That doesn't absolve parent responsibility. You got to make sure your kids are in the right car seat. You got to make sure they're actually wearing their seatbelt. But this doesn't allow them to just design, a huge piece of metal that a whole family is stuffed into without any protections. Like, you're on your own. Like, we have no other industry that functions the way that these tech companies have been allowed to function. And so it's time that we need to change that. And that's really what this bill is trying to do.
So I'm sure I know the answer to this question, but why don't they want to make these changes? I mean, they seem common sense. They seem kind of basic. They seem kind of the kind of thing that you would want to do as a company to protect the people that are using them. Why don't they make these changes?
It's really, it's corporate America. It is how we make our money, right? The longer that you get eyeballs on a platform, that's more ad revenue that they can generate off that user. That is more data that they can collect off that user. And their industry now and their following and are so big. Okay, we can lose, 250 kids. It doesn't impact their bottom line, right? I mean, it sounds so, it's like really grotesque to think about it like that. But it's not in their monetary interests to make these changes, because engagement would likely drop. And even if some of these fascinating state attorneys general court filings, if you read any of them, you see that, Meta has done studies around engagement and how do you keep users engaged and the negative consequences that they know, but it keeps their eyes on the platform. And so it's fine. We don't need to change it, even though their findings show that kids are feeling worse about themselves the longer they're on a platform. I think those filings have also shown they know all of this and they don't care.
Yeah. And you talked about the auto industry, and the pushback really that the auto industry had for decades, right? About making their products safe. It was going to add too much money to the cost of a vehicle and consumers weren't going to buy the cars. So we didn't want to do that. It was a question of, what are people's freedoms? We shouldn't require people to have seatbelts. It's taking away their right to make their own decisions. So you see that. You also saw that, you saw that with the tobacco industry, right? For decades and decades and decades. And so, an industry that always led with, there are some benefits to smoking. And it was like, really? What are they? And it was like, well, it sharpens your thinking and it helps with digestion. And ultimately we learned that there really wasn't any socially redeeming qualities around cigarettes, right? There are socially redeeming qualities around social media and the internet. And we know that it does provide access and communities for people who oftentimes feel left out. And so none of us who are involved in this, or at least none of the folks that I'm aware of that we've been involved with, have any interest in censoring the internet. We don't have any interest we're not going to be able to unring the bell, right? this phone is as much of the DNA of kids today as anything that there ever was. And so as you look at this fight, one of the things that I have found fascinating about it is that this is a unicorn bill, right? This is a piece of unicorn legislation in a day and age when nobody can agree to anything.
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit about that, because in the Senate, I don't remember the last time there was a bill of significant public policy where you had this kind of bipartisan support.
I mean, I haven't either. And someone, I forget who mentioned it to me, but it passed 91-3. Someone told me, like, the Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization bill, which is a must-pass piece of legislation because it keeps the skies open for us to fly. That's important. And air safety, I mean, that is a must-pass legislation. That didn't get the same amount of support as the Kids Online Safety Act. And so I think what has been so powerful of the movement that, like, we have collectively built is, I think we have incredible leadership in the Senate, in Senators Blumenthal and Blackburn, and staff that have really decided, like, we don't agree on much, but we agree on this. And we're going to put all that other stuff aside for a second, and we're going to focus on this. And they've been incredibly candid and open with all of us in the process, and kind of brought us along with them, right? It's very rare that I have had so much deep conversations with both offices, right? They wanted to involve us, right? I mean, I think that was a critical game changer. And I think I don't think I've ever really worked alongside anyone in the tech space, right? Like, all these, we have a bi-weekly coalition call that, we see each other on, Eric, but I'm like, when have we ever been on a call with, these tech accountability nonprofits? I mean, we just never would. Our paths wouldn't cross. We're in our little mental health silo. That's where where we reside, and we know our players. And this has just been in such an interesting, like, configuration of groups, and bringing in just so many unique strengths in different areas of expertise has been, I think, so powerful. And then you have the parents. I mean, you have families that lives have been changed forever. And if it wasn't for their bravery and wanting justice, I don't know where we would be. And so you're right, it is like a unicorn that we've all come together. And, I joke every year we've been doing this. I'm on my 3rd year of doing this. We are almost to the finish line. And I joked at the end of every year, I'd always, tell Senator Blumenthal and Blackburn staff, I can't believe we're all still speaking, I was like, we didn't get it done this year, but it's a victory. We're all still speaking to one another. And it's true. I mean, this is hard work. It's frustrating work. But we're really close. And so it's like, we can't give up now. We just can't.
Yeah. I mean, the work that those of you who've been leading this fight for those 3 years, I mean, this is, nothing in Washington, D.C. ever moves quickly. And oftentimes when you think it's moving quickly, you have to kind of look over your shoulder to figure out what it is that you should be nervous about. And so as we think about this bill, it passed out of the Senate with 91 yes votes, and 91 yes votes, frankly, from some of the most conservative Republicans, the most liberal Democrats, who helped power this through. And so now it's in the House. And so what should folks be thinking about right now as this conversation takes place in the House? And if you're an average person on the street watching this and listening to this, what should they know about what they need to do if we want to see this bill get passed?
I would say email your representative for sure, your House representative in support. Tell them to co-sponsor the bill and tell them to work with their colleagues and ask for them to co-sponsor the bill. As we started the conversation, every member in Congress has friends and their own little cohort they like to hang with in Congress. So anytime my boss, I was trying to get a bill in front of him, he said, well, who's on it? Are my friends on it? So your representative has friends. And so it's just like, it's not just about their support and their co-sponsorship, which is really important, but it's about talking to their other friends and colleagues in the House to also support it. Because that makes a difference. It's kind of like the domino effect, right? Because every member has their own little cohort of members that they are close to. And so that is, I think, the quickest thing that you can do. But then also don't believe everything you read, right? I mean, the narrative, and if I, got paid for every time someone said Coast is not moving, I mean, I could retire probably after this, right? I mean, no one said it could be done. The press has been really odd, right? Like we had this extraordinary win out of the Senate and the narrative really hasn't changed. I mean, it's still like, oh, I don't know, that bill, it's, uphill battle. It's almost comical at this point. So in your advocacy, don't get so fixated on the headlines. That is what I have learned, because those people aren't in it.
Yeah.
And if you can share your voice and why you support something, ignore that noise, because it really is noise. And there's a lot of it these days for the House. And so I think that is going to be our charge, is to cut through that noise on the House side and just keep our eye on the prize, getting this to advance, because our communities have waited long enough. They have suffered enough. These families we have worked with have suffered enough. We can do better. We can make sure that future generations are much more protected than the kids now online, and they should be.
Well, and that's right. And not only can they be, they should be, right? Keeping kids safe and giving them access is not mutually exclusive. And I think that's the piece where the opponents of this legislation, and any kind of legislation, not just this bill, but even state-based efforts where they've tried to do similar types of things, there is this false choice that you either get to have access or you don't. But you can't keep kids safe and give them access. And it's an absurd notion. The same technology that created these platforms can be used to protect kids and still give them access. So
absolutely.
At the beginning of this conversation, I told you the 30 minutes were going to go fast.
Yes, they have gone fast.
I also had a little homework assignment for you as we end these conversations this week during Suicide Prevention Awareness Week and month. Everything that we talk about is about providing hope to people. And that's the most important thing we can do, as we talk about suicide prevention and how do we help people, whatever struggle they may have. So as we kind of close this out, we come to an end, besides having people reach out to their member of Congress and tell them to support COSA. What's a kind of hopeful message you want people to know as it relates to this whole subject matter of kids and social media?
I would say change is possible, even when the state of our political environment just looks so chaotic and dire at times. Things can and still do get done. And so to kind of keep the faith in that, and that is why your voice still is important, why you still should email your member of Congress. I think we kind of get into this, well, I'm just one person, like they're not going to care. I'm telling you right now, like that is wrong. That is false. Your voice does matter. And I think we don't really give ourselves enough credit. And I like to remind people that your vote, your member works for you. They are there to represent you and your interests. And you have every right to tell them when they're doing that or not. And so that is what, when I take my constituent meetings and I was on the Hill and I'd meet with these members, from the district, and they were all so nervous about meeting with me. And I would just tell them, like, you're educating me. You make me look good.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what can I do to help you? Because that's why they're there. And I think staff can forget that. And it's kind of incumbent upon us to remember to tell them that. Right. And that's why we show up.
Well said. We're going to keep showing up until we get this passed. Thank you for your leadership, Allison. Thanks for continuing the fight. And we will continue the fight until this gets done. So thank you for your time today. And I look forward to continuing to work with you on this.
Thank you, Eric.
Talk to you later.
Bye.